Hello everyone, Necromancy Rickets here, once again bringing some necromancy for you. And this time around, I have a video on the 10 boss monsters I'd most like to see in Go format. Now before we get started, I'm of course going to have to qualify that I don't mean that I think these cards should be in Go format, because Go format is a historical format, but I just decided to look at some cards that, if they did exist back in the day and Go format, I think that they'd make things kind of interesting and make more deck options to play with. And none of these cards are going to be stronger than BLS, so even if they were added, you would still see Chaos at the top, I believe. But if you had some sort of custom format that included these cards and didn't include BLS, I think you'd have something quite interesting. With that out of the way, I'll also say that this does not include any fusion monsters. Fusion monsters would be their own video, so you're not going to see Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon here, even though a lot of people do wish that Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon was in the format. Unfortunately, it just was not printed at that time in the US for some reason. But anyway, onto the list. First up, we have Dark Samorg. While face up on the field, this card is also Wind attribute. If this card is in your hand, you can banish one Dark and one Wind monster from your graveyard to special summon this card. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one Dark and one Wind monster from your hand, special summon this card. Your opponent cannot set cards. This card is number 10 on the list. First of all, because I think that the ability to turn off your opponent's set cards is kind of a boring strategy when it really comes down to it. Usually this is paired up with, in the formats where it exists, with anti-spell fragrance to completely shut off the opponent's spells and traps. But of course it can still be stopped by monsters. Also, it supports dark monsters, which are already some of the strongest monsters in the game, but at least it also supports the wind attribute. And being able to come back over and over again is kind of interesting, but also very costly, so it's not overpowered in my opinion, unlike a lot of cards that can summon themselves from the graveyard later on. And I think overall it would just be kind of interesting to play a dark wind deck in Go format and not have it just be basically random cards. Number 9 is Elemental Grace Doriado. Must be special summoned from your hand by having 6 or more monsters with different attributes in the graveyards. Gains attack and defense equal to the number of different attributes in the graveyards times 500. When your opponent would special summon a monster, you can banish 3 monsters from your graveyard, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. Now this does count both players' graveyards, so you don't technically have to have all the attributes yourself, but I think that this card would especially be interesting in Go format because the Ritual Monster Doriado counts as all attributes except for Dark, even in the graveyard. So essentially she'd be able to act as all of the requirements except for one card to be able to summon it, and it would give it a huge boost. But its attack doesn't get so high that it's ridiculous, and also you have to banish 3 monsters to be able to use its effect in the first place, so most of the time it's just going to be a beat stick. And plus in Go format there's a lot of normal summons you can do that could still destroy this card, such as Exiled Force and DD Warrior Lady and Tribe Fighting Virus and so on. So I think while it could be a very interesting card, it's not going to be overpowered even with Doriado being able to take up most of its requirements. But having some sort of incentive to play a deck with every attribute I think is kind of interesting. Number 8 is Hieratic Dragon of Sutek. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, I don't know how to pronounce it. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 3 dragon-type normal monsters from your graveyard. Once per turn, you can banish 1 dragon-type monster from your graveyard to target 1 card on the field, destroy that target. Dragons, for quite some time, even before the Hieratics, which this is part of, were kind of a strategy that was surrounded around normal monsters. some of the best dragons are normal monsters after all, including, of course, Blue Eyes White Dragon. But there's also Luster Dragon and Dragon Dwelling in the Cave and Luster Dragon number 2 and so on and so forth. And I think that this card probably wouldn't make that strategy good, but I think that it would make it so that you can at least build toward it and not feel completely terrible about playing it out. And if nothing else, you can, banish 3 dragons and then have a beat stick on the field. But the more dragons you have, the stronger it gets. And it also sort of makes it so that it can't be overpowered, even if you have like 3 copies of it, because they will eat each other's food for their effect, and thus make it harder to play multiple copies in a deck. So that's why I added this card to the list. Next up, we have Gaia Plate, the Earth Giant, who is a level 8 rock with 2800 attack, and once per turn during standby phase, you banish 1 rock monster in your graveyard, or send this card to the graveyard. You can special summon this card from your hand by banishing 2 rock monsters in your graveyard. If this card battles an opponent's monster, that monster's attack and defense becomes halved during damage calculation. So, in essence, it's like it has double the attack, but not really, because it's not dealing double the damage to the opponent. You know what I mean. This card is pretty much impossible to kill while it's in attack mode in Go format, unless you have like some ridiculous equip strategy going on, which makes it a little difficult, but it does have the requirement to banish a rock in your graveyard every standby phase, so it sort of balances out. And plus, again, even though it's basically impossible to defeat in battle, it's still not as good as BLS. And of course, you can normal summon this, which you can't with BLS, but BLS gets 2 attacks at 3,000, potentially 3,000 damage each, and this, at best, yeah, you can defeat a BLS in battle, but that isn't going to win you the game by itself. It doesn't have any removal effect, and I think it's just fair and interesting. Then next up, I have the 3 Sacred Beasts, which are Ravael, Hamon, and Uriah. They each require their own 3 cards to be attributed. Ravael requires 3 Fiends, Hamon requires 3 continuous spells, and Uriah requires 3 continuous traps. And I think that unlike the regular gods, which I think are probably actually too powerful for Go format, considering they could be summoned with things like Reasoning Gate and special summoned from the graveyard with cards like Premature Burial, to be able to do massive amounts of damage in one turn. The Sacred Beasts are pretty fair, and they have interesting effects, and they give you different ideas of what sort of deck to build rather than just I tribute 3 monsters or I just cheated out deck. A deck that relies on continuous spells that isn't just purely burn, I think is interesting, although Hamon is good in burn decks as it is. And also Uriah sort of incentivizes a whole new type of deck to be played, because you want tons of traps in your graveyard, but also you want traps that stick around. So I think the 3 of them would be interesting inclusions into Go format. Next up is Evil Dragon Ananta. It's a reptile level 8 and must be special summoned by banishing all reptiles you control and in your graveyard, and gains attack and defense equal to the number banished times 600. Once per turn during your end phase, you target 1 card on the field and destroy it. I think that this would be interesting to make you actually want to play reptiles in Go format, because pretty much there's no reason to. The only really good reptile that we have in Goat is Sinister Serpent, which technically this actually is like anti-Sinister Serpent, because it banishes it and then you won't be able to use it anymore. But you actually have a reason that you want to play reptiles in your deck, get a bunch of them in the graveyard, and even if you only play a few of them, This can still be summoned and then used for its end phase effect to destroy any card on the field, although you do have to keep in mind that it can also destroy itself if it's the only card on the field. Then we have Doomdozer, which must be special summoned by banishing 2 insect monsters from your graveyard. If it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you send the top card of the deck to the grave, which is more of a detriment than a positive. But Doomdozer is one of those cards that I've always really enjoyed when it was playable. Having 2800 attack, 2600 defense, just being able to slap down a fat insect, give you a reason to actually play bugs. And I think that just having that big beater and not in a format where it creates massive OTKs would be very interesting. And there's a lot of different insect decks that you can make based around this, including return decks and just plain beatdown. Then we have Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, a level 10 dinosaur with 3500 attack, 3200 defense. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 2 dinosaur monsters from your graveyard. Once per turn, during your main phase, you can destroy 1 monster in your hand or field, and if you do, change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position. This card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. At the start of the damage step, if this card attacks a defense position monster, you can inflict 1000 damage to your opponent, and if you do, send that defense position monster to the graveyard. This card has a lot of raw power and can technically win you games faster than BLS, but requires you to play dinosaur monsters, and in Go format, there's really not a lot of dinosaurs. Unfortunately, we don't even have Sabersaurus, so basically your biggest beater is 1700 attack with Cabazals. And so while the effect on this card is really good, I still think it's less utility than BLS, and it requires you to play some monsters that are weaker as opposed to dark and light for BLS. So I think that while it has a very powerful effect, it still doesn't match that deck in power, but could make dinosaurs somewhat viable to play. Then next up, we have another double header with Desert Twister and Frost and Flame Dragon. Desert Twister is kind of like a Chaos Sorcerer, except for it requires wind and earth monsters, and Frost and Flame Dragon requires water and fire monsters. And Desert Twister lets you discard a card to destroy a spell or trap, and Frost and Flame lets you discard a card to destroy a monster. I think that they would both make for fun decks that are sort of like Chaos, except for their own attributes, and they're a lot weaker than Chaos still, not only because they have a requirement to use their effects, and also because they require more cards, require you to banish a total of 3 monsters, so they're harder in general to get out. But their attributes are weaker in Go format, so overall they really are lower power level, but still I think that they'd be very fun to play around with. And finally, number 1 on the list here. One that has potential for a lot of power and to get out of hand really quick, but that I think would be very interesting to see. And that is Loud Cloud, the Storm Serpent. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 1 fire and 1 wind monster from your graveyard, and it is itself a water, so it doesn't even fuel itself like BLS and Sork do. And you can use each of the following effects of Loud Cloud, the Storm Serpent, once per turn. Banish 1 fire monster from your graveyard, target 1 monster your opponent controls, and destroy it. And if you do, this card gains attack equal to destroyed monster's original attack. You can banish 1 wind monster from your graveyard, then target 1 card in your opponent's spell and trap card zone, destroy it. So while you can drop this and destroy a monster and destroy a spell or trap, it requires you to play fire and wind monsters, which are the weakest attributes in Go format. They don't have nearly as many good cards and not as much synergy either. And also, if you're doing that, it means you had to have 2 fire and 2 wind monsters in your graveyard already, which is a lot more commitment than BLS. But the main concern here is if you can continually use the effect, it gets really out of hand. Like if you can banish a fire monster every turn, destroy your opponent's set monster, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, it's kind of insane. But you also had to have a lot of setup to be able to do that, and you're going to be spending resources to be able to do that. So I think overall it's probably pretty fair. But that's it for my top 10 bosses that I wish were in Go format. What do you guys think about the list? If you want, I have way more than 10 other bosses that I would like to see in Go format. So if you would like a continuation of this, I'd be more than happy to do it. And let me know down in the comments below as well what monsters you might want to see in Go format in this hypothetical situation. Thank you very much. Have a good one.